Welcome and good morning. Good morning to those of you who are here in person, and good morning to our colleagues who are online and joining us virtually for this and all of our other plenaries over the next 2 days. It is so great for us to be able to gather here in 2023, celebrating OCASI's 45th anniversary and continuing the revolutionary spirit that started OCASI, the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants. Please give yourself a hand. A very warm welcome to our funders from IRCC, from Ministry of Labour and Immigration, from the United Way of Greater Toronto, and from the City of Toronto. And to you, OCASI membership, who support the Council financially. For those of you who are members of OCMS, thank you, thank you, thank you. Your investment in the Council allows us to support your colleague organizations who are smaller, who are emerging, and who are serving highly marginalized people. We are so thankful. You don't know how much it is that you contribute to us as a sector. So thank you, thank you, thank you to all of you. A few housekeeping details. A reminder that if you're not bilingual, please pick up your headsets. Parking is free. No need to register. Just find a parking space and park. We often have people asking because they've lost something. If you've lost something, lost and found is at the registration desk. All of our conversations with each other, unless you're up here on stage, will need to happen at the 2-floor microphones. We encourage you to do so. At the end of our plenary this morning, and we're running about 15 minutes behind time, at the end of our plenary this morning, we will give about 10 minutes of an open mic. So if you have a campaign or a program that you want to promote, then please line up behind one of the microphones and you can share with your colleagues here. Down the hall and to the left is our quiet space. It's a space for meditation, a space for prayer, a space because you need a break. We have art supplies in there, or you can just sit. It is a quiet space set up for you. We know that we are in very, very troubling times, and we want to ensure that all who are here feel welcome and feel supported. OCASI prides itself on open, compassionate dialogue. We welcome respectful debate. We know how to hold many truths at the same time. And it is with that spirit that we come together as a sector over these 2 days, but in the days and weeks ahead, as we continue to hold space for our families and friends and families of our colleagues across the globe, from Palestine and Israel to Sudan to Congo to Ukraine. We are holding space for all that is happening. To that end, we know that conversations can be difficult. And so we have set up a line, and I will repeat the number slowly. If you call 416, or if you text, 416-627-9407, that is 416-627-9407, text, "I would like to chat." Someone will respond to you and tell you where to meet up. We have counselors in the room who are here to be supportive. The number again is 416-627-9407. I believe that number is posted at various places in the hallway outside. And so, it is always, always a pleasure to introduce Elder Catherine Tammaro. Elder Catherine Tammaro is a multidisciplinary artist whose practice spans decades. She is an enrolled member of the Wyandot of Andadon Nation, which is part of the Wendat Confederacy, and served as their communications officer for many years. Elder Tammaro is a seated spotted turtle clan tradition keeper and is active throughout the city and beyond in many organizations as an elder in residence, a mentor, and a cultural advisor. She is an alumna of the Ontario College of Art and has a diverse career, multiple exhibits and installations, published written works and presentations, and continues her practice as well as supporting the work and the development of other artists on an ongoing basis. She is served on the board of TAC's Income Precarity Working Group, and was the chair of the TAC's Indigenous Advisory Committee in 2020-21. Please join me in welcoming Elder Tammaro.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone slept well. Again, it's an honor to be here for the second day of the conference, or the first day of the conference, actually, formally. Again, I'd like to introduce myself in the language, and this is done for the ancestors so that they know I'm speaking. Tomeshra Ijatsi Ndata Jaton Ngyawish Hatiyaronk Wandat Ndi Toronto Ndare, which basically means my clan name is Tomeshra, and that means coming day. That refers to the spotted turtle who is a maker, is an artist. She's up there in the nighttime sky making all the heavenly bodies for Atensik, or the woman who fell from above, which is part of our creation story. Yesterday, I did a brief version of the Thanksgiving address, just to remind you that this is an address. It's not a prayer per se, but it has that kind of importance. What it is medicine. There's a beautiful teacher named Deahonte Miller from Six Nations, and he talks about each aspect of this address being medicine. And every time this address is recited, it sends out a particular vibration. And so it becomes an activation of intention. And that's really beautiful. And the intention is to connect with the natural world, and the intention is to understand and feel and recognize in all of our senses and all of our ways that the natural world is the ultimate supporter of who we are. And that includes everything. That includes the sacred. That includes all of the plant, all of our kin in the animal world and the plant world, everything, the waters, etc. So I'm going to take you through a little bit more formal version of the address today. And yesterday we talked about the word eo as a suffix, and that it means great, beautiful, wonderful, superlative, fantastic, incredible, kind of beyond imagination. And it happens to be at the end of the word Ontario, right? It's pretty amazing. And you're all from Ontario, from what I understand. So I think you're all pretty amazing by extension. So I wanted to ask you to affirm each of these intentions by saying EO, and recognize that this is a Wendat gift to you. This is a solemn word, or a solemn suffix, if you will. But I also wanted to ask you to recognize that when I say, now our minds are one, what I'm really suggesting is that you feel that this is where your mind should be located, right? Sometimes it's impossible for all of us to come to one mind because we come from such diverse experience. But in this case, this is where our minds should be. We should be grateful, and we should be extending those greetings and thanks to all of the natural world for what it provides for us. So again, I'd ask you to turn off your cell phones, if you will, and put your feet flat on the floor, uncross your legs, connect, maybe take a deep breath, and just relax, and just open your heart center, and open your minds to what I'm going to say, to repeat these words. So today we've gathered and we see that the cycles of life continue. We've been given our duty, our responsibility to live in balance and harmony, not only with each other, but with all living things. So we bring our minds together as one, or this is how our minds should be, and we send our greetings and thanks out to each other as people. So if you just want to take a moment to do that again, just look at your neighbor. Let's make eye contact. Offer them a smile. And recognize how important they are in your world of service and how this address serves you as well. We're thankful to our Mother, the Earth, for she gives us all that we need for life. She supports our feet as we walk about upon her. And it gives us joy that she continues to care for us as she has from the beginning of time. To our Mother, our most beautiful Mother Earth, we send our deepest greetings and thanks. And this is how our minds should be. And you can respond by saying, Iyo.
Iyo.
Right on. Thank you. To the waters, we give thanks to all the waters of the world for quenching our thirst and providing us with incredible strength. Also, fluidity, flexibility, right? Water is life, we all know that. And we know its power in many forms. Waterfalls, rain, mists, streams, rivers, oceans, great lakes. So with one mind, we bring our mind into that space of togetherness, and we send our greetings and thanks out to the spirit that lives, that is the water itself. Iyo. We turn our minds to all the fish life in the water. The fish were instructed, they have original instructions as well, to cleanse and purify the water, and they also, of course, give themselves to us as food. We're grateful that we can still find pure water in this world. So we turn our minds to the fish, and we send our greetings and thanks, and this is how our minds should be.
Iyo.
Iyo. We turn toward the vast fields of plant life that we see before us, and I think of the oak savanna in High Park. Do you all know about the oak savanna, which was created by indigenous people hundreds of years ago, and it's still thriving? So we turn our minds toward those vast fields of plant life. As far as the eye can see, they grow, working many wonders for us. They sustain life in many forms. With our minds gathered together, we give thanks, and we look forward to seeing that plant life thrive forever. This is how our minds should be. Iyo.
Iyo.
With one mind, we turn to honor and thank all the food plants. How many people had beautiful fruit on their plate today that we harvest from our gardens? Since the beginning of time, the grains, vegetables, beans, and berries have helped the people survive, and many other living things draw strength from them too. We gather all the food plants together as one, and we send them our greetings and our thanks. This is how our minds should be.
Iyo.
We turn to all the medicine herbs of the world. From the beginning, they were instructed to take away our illness. They're always waiting and ready to heal us. There are many stories about the plants that we need coming to us to give us their medicine. We're happy they're still among us, those special few who remember how to use the plants for healing. And with one mind, we send our greetings and thanks out to the medicines and the keepers of the medicines. This is how our minds should be.
Iyo.
We gather our minds together to send our greetings and thanks to all the animal life in the world. They have many things to teach us as people. We're honored by them when they give up their lives so that we may use their bodies as food for our people. We see them near our homes and in the deep forests. We're glad that they are still here, and we hope that it will always be so.
Iyo.
Iyo. We turn our thoughts to the beautiful, mighty trees. The earth has many families of trees who have their own instructions and uses. Some provide us with shelter and shade, and others with fruit and beauty and other useful things. Many people of the world use the tree as a symbol of peace and strength.
Iyo.
With one mind, we send our greetings and thanks out to the tree of life.
Iyo.
Iyo. The birds, we put our minds together as one and thank all the birds who move and fly about over our heads. The Creator gave them beautiful songs. Each day they remind us to enjoy and appreciate our lives. The eagle was chosen to be their leader, and to all the birds, from the smallest to the largest and most elaborate, we send our joyful greetings and our thanks. This is how our minds should be.
Ew.
I can't hear you.
Ew.
Right, right. How many people have actually been close to an eagle or an owl or a cardinal? Incredible beings, or seen that flock of geese flying overhead heading south. You know, geese are teachings about family and togetherness and support. They're so beautiful. We are thankful to all the powers we know as the four winds, and this is something that's very specific to the Haudenosaunee people and the Wyandot and Wendat. We hear their voices in the moving air as they refresh us and purify the air we breathe. They help us to bring the change of seasons, and also, I think, personal change. They kind of blow through us as well. From the four directions they come, bringing us messages and giving us strength. And with one mind, we send our greetings and thanks out to all the four winds. So this is how our minds should be. Yo. We turn to the west, where our grandfathers, the thunder beings, live. With lightning and thundering voices, they bring with them the water that renews life. And we'll hear them soon as the season begins to really change. We bring our minds together as one to send greetings of thanks to our grandfathers, the thunderers. Eo. And of course, we think of the thunderbirds. The thunderbirds are so common to so many indigenous cultures in the Great Lakes region and beyond. We now send our greetings and thanks to our eldest brother, the sun. Each day, without fail, he travels the sky from east to west, bringing the light of a new day. He is the source of all the fires of life, and many indigenous people talk about our internal fire, and also in other traditions, in yoga, and there are all kinds of traditions that honor that internal fire. When that spark goes out, we're no longer warm and generating the heat that we should be generating. So we honor that internal fire. Now our minds are one. Okay. We put our minds together to give thanks to our oldest grandmother, the moon, who lights the nighttime sky. She's the leader of women all over the world, and she governs the movement of the ocean tides. By her changing face and force, actually, we measure time. And it's the moon who watches over the arrival of children here on Earth. With one mind, we send our most heartfelt greetings and thanks out to our grandmother, Oma Shuta'a, the moon. Thank you. Now our minds are one.
Yeah.
We give thanks to the stars who are spread across the sky like jewelry. We see them in the night, helping the moon to light the darkness and bringing the dew to the gardens and growing things. When we travel at night, they guide us home. With our minds gathered together as one, we send our greetings and thanks out to our ancestors, the stars. This is how our minds should be.
You.
Can I hear you again?
You.
How many feel star-starved in the city? Yeah, I would really suggest that you all go out into the night and have a look for some of those beautiful star beings. We gather our minds to greet and thank the enlightened teachers who've come to help us throughout the ages. When we forget how to live in harmony and peace, they remind us of the way we were instructed to be as people. With one mind, we send our greetings and thanks out to these caring teachers, and I include you all in this special part of the address. So thank you. This is how our minds should be.
You.
And now we turn our thoughts finally to the Creator, however you define that, to the Great Spirit, to God, to whichever word or name you call them by. We send our greetings and thanks out for all the gifts of creation. Everything we need to live a good life here on Mother Earth has been provided. For all the love that is still around us, we gather our minds together as one and send our choicest words of greetings and thanks to our Creator, the Great Spirit. This is how our minds should be. And I'd just like you to take a moment and acknowledge, recognize, and thank those who are forgotten those who did not arrive, those who were unable to get here, those who are no longer with us. We remember them, and we send our heartfelt prayers and our greetings and thanks out to them as well, because they're still here, they're resonant. We have a phrase, it's called the ancestral present, meaning that our ancestors are still very much here with us. So we send our greetings and thanks out to them as well. And thank you very much. Iyo, Shashkanonya, that means I wish you peace, and take care. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elder Tammaro. We truly, truly appreciate the blessings. And now I'm inviting our chair, OCASI's chair, Alfred Lamb, to come and do a brief acknowledgement and thank you of the land on which we have been so welcomed. Alfred.
We would like to begin our events today by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and this territory is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy and allied nations, signifying a shared dish and to only take what one needs. The wampum speaks to a shared responsibility to keep the dish clean and to always ensure there is enough for future generations. Takranto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. As a sector, we have every responsibility to acknowledge the ongoing and violent methods of settler colonialism and confront and disrupt the tools of colonization. It is important to think about how the nonprofit sector benefits from and perpetuates settler colonialism. What is our role in that disruption? And what is our organization's role? I can encourage us all to think about the actions that we can take to continue to support local Indigenous communities and organizing, and how we are distributing our time and resources towards tangible action. OCASI unequivocally calls for the implementation of the 181 measures put forth in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, in addition to the completion of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. To date, only 13 of the 94 calls to action have been completed. The Yellowhead Institute, in their calls to action accountability report from 2022, stated that as certain reporting calls to actions are completed, we are also reminded this year that there can be pathways for settler institutional leadership. Indigenous peoples have time and again been taking on the hard work of leading and steering reconciliation efforts. But what does it look like to share the obligations of reconciliation? We invite you to have these ongoing conversations year-round on what this means for you at your meetings, in your boardrooms, and in your annual plans. Specifically, we call on organizations in the refugee and immigrant serving sector to interrogate and to investigate the responsibilities that we have, working on stolen land in a nation that continues to build the settler colonial project. What is our way forward? How do we continue doing our work while also fostering a commitment to meaningful, respectful, and accountable collaboration with local indigenous communities and work to center their experiences and ways of knowing? These questions can help guide how we approach our work moving forward in order to better engage in ongoing action towards reconciliation.
Thank you so much, Alfred. And it is so good that I'm able to stand here and say, because of our ongoing relationship and advocacy with our federal friends, that building relationships, working on issues of reconciliation, beginning to accept our responsibility as a sector for working towards true reconciliation with First Peoples, that our national funder has prioritized it as one of the areas they will be looking to support in the upcoming call for proposal. So thank you, IRCC, for beginning to walk the talk. You can give them a clap. They're in the room. We have an assistant deputy in the room. We want him to know that what he's hearing from his colleagues on the ground is coming from the sector, and that, you know, the sector supports it, and we appreciate that we're all working towards a progressive politics. And now, ideas that ignite. Before I introduce my keynote speaker, we have three wonderful people who will set the tone for the day. They have 3 minutes each to speak about anything that they want, but only 3 minutes. At the end of 3 minutes, I think they changed this. Now they've given Kimahli's time. Would you somebody put this back to 3 minutes, please? After 3 minutes, I'm going to start clapping. So even if they're speaking and they speak louder, we'll clap louder. You'll have 3 minutes. I will introduce them all at the same time, and that they will come up in the order that they're introduced. It is my great pleasure to introduce Stefan Kalikaden, who is the Youth and Access to Education Coordinator at the FCJ Refugee Center, and a graduate from the Community Workers Program at George Brown College. They have worked in the sector since 2018 in various capacities and have a strong passion in youth rights and access to education. Stefan will be followed by Tatiana Ferguson. Tatiana is the co-founder and managing director of Black Queer Youth Collective, a dynamic revolutionary leadership development group located here in Toronto. Tatiana has been recognized for her work, including receiving the Queer Activism Award from the Bonham Center for Sexual Diversity in 2019, and the Outstanding Achievements in Queer Activism from the LGBTQ Youth Line in 2016. Tatiana would be followed by Dan Walter, Executive Director of Margaret's Housing and Community Support Services. Diane became the first Executive Director of Margaret's Housing and Community Support Services, then known as Margaret Fraser House. She has more than 25 years' experience in direct service, administration, management, development, and implementation of health and social service programs with and for homeless, mental illness, victims of violence, immigrant, and substance-using populations. Diane has been the backbone behind the coordination of all the work that's been done here in Toronto with African refugee claimants. Please give a hand for our three dynamic speakers, starting with Stefan Enrique Kalikaden.
Thank you, Debbie. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stefan. As mentioned, I'm the Youth and Access to Education Coordinator at FCJ Refugee Center. For folks who might not know us, FCJ is a nonprofit organization that has been working for the past 30 years with newcomers and folks with precarious status in the areas of immigration, settlement, and integration. I'm going to talk about two of our 30 core values today, which is youth engagement and education. That's also at the core of the FCJ Youth Network, which is a youth network made up of newcomer youth between the ages of 13 and 30. And the group focuses on community building, advocacy, and activism on the front lines at the local, provincial, and federal levels for over the past decade. Now, within the group, in 2016, they produced a consolidated report on the education system in Ontario at the elementary and secondary levels, covering 5 salient areas, which was getting in, equitable participation, anti-discrimination, support, and moving on. One of the biggest achievements of that report was access to post-secondary education for folks with precarious statuses through the Sanctuary Scholars Program at York University, which is still in function today. Despite this and many other successes, we have noticed a lot of depletion within the policies and procedures in the education system, particularly post the start of the pandemic. Now, with support and funding from the Maitrey Foundation, we are going to produce a similar report card in 2 phases at the elementary and secondary levels, but also the post-secondary level colleges and universities. Phase 1 will be produced at the end of the 2023-2024 school cycle. It will assess the current education system as it is and provide a list of areas for improvement. Phase 2 will be produced at the end of the 2024-2025 school cycle and will observe some of the implementation of the suggestions, but also highlight the positive and negatives at that point. The group that's leading this is called the Uprooted Youth Committee, and they're made up of newcomer youth from the FCJ Youth Network that are either currently in the Ontario education system or are facing barriers in accessing to education. What we want to highlight about the group is the transition from youth engagement, which is participating in focus groups, towards youth leadership, which is leading important projects like this, similar to the 2016 report. From this report group, if you want to get engaged, we have different opportunities for you to do so. If you want to provide resources or information on similar projects within your organizations, or if you want to host focus groups, which will be led by the Uprooted Youth Committee within the communities you work, or simply know about programs, projects, and other initiatives that we do, you are welcome to reach out to me over email at stefanjk@FCJ Refugee Center. And I want to thank Debbie and OCASI for having me, and I'll pass it back to you.
Right on time and no notes. A tough act to follow. Stefan. Tatiana.
Morning, everyone. Now, I'm going to admit, I'm going to find this a little challenging to talk about our work in just 3 minutes. Hopefully the timer did not start. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. It's so nice to see so many folks here. So today, I'm going to be talking about transformational leadership. As mentioned in my bio, for the past, I guess since immigrating to Canada, so from 2014 to date, I've been doing a lot of work in the immigration sector, supporting Black, queer, and trans youth specifically. And with that said, there are a lot of things that I've learned, and I'm here to share some of those lessons learned today. So the BQIC was formed in 2017, specifically in response to a need, a gap in services for Black, queer, and trans folks. And myself with our co-founders created the BQIC to kind of center Blackness, to center the experience of Blackness and queerness at the intersection. Our work went on to influence how programs are designed, as Stefan talked about the need to not only engage youth, but to allow them to be in leadership roles, to allow them to be in leadership positions. And over the past 5 years, 6 years now, I should say, the BQIC has really stepped up to the plate and done just that. In 2020, during the pandemic, we did a community needs assessment where we found that there were 5 action areas needed for our youth. Needed for Black youth to feel more fulfilled. There was a need for more programs led by and for Black, queer, and trans youth in Ontario. A need for trans-specific programs. There was a need to center the experiences of queer women and lesbians, and also the need to increase capacity in terms of education, training, and skills development for the community to address some of the employment needs. Whilst our organization is still very grassroots, despite our impact, we are committed to trying to address all of these issues. Today, I'm most interested actually in talking about some of the work we'll be doing next year as we engage in our strategic plan for the remainder of this year. One of our pilot projects, which is a executive youth leadership program, is going to help to cultivate the talent and leadership skills, as well as develop, ensure that these youth have project management skills to go on and to fill vacancies within our organization. I call this transformational leadership because, as many of you know, or if you do not know, I am a trans person, so I know quite a bit about change. And I've been working in the leadership capacity for quite a while now. So I think it's a play on how my experience of transitioning in Canada since leaving the Bahamas and leading programs in community, whether it's through direct service, research projects, or through policy, has influenced my work. With that said, I'm so glad to be here. We have 5 minutes. 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm so glad to be here, and thank you all.
Merci, Tatiana. Diane. Yeah, it's bright. Is that hard for you?
I've got some eye issues.
Yeah,
and
Diana's going to have to sit down.
This is way too much of a spotlight. I can't see anything. That's what you call accommodation, is that it? Yes. Thank you.
Microphone 3, please.
Testing. Good morning, everyone. Are you all well? Are you all well? Excellent. So when I was asked to present an idea that ignites, what came to mind was the creation of the Black Community Advisory Table, bar none. While it's not an idea per se, because it's evolved to somewhat of an entity, it is little more than an idea. This is an idea, an entity that should have come about a long time ago. However, it's never too late to bring a good idea to fruition. The table is a consortium in the housing space that is comprised of providers of housing on the continuum, whether it's shelter, supportive housing, social housing, funders, academic, developers, and planners. The mission, in summary, is to be the go-to entity to inform governments, politicians, bureaucrats, and industry. The abhorrent and unacceptable reality is that the Black community experiences discrimination and racism writ large in the housing space disproportionately. I won't bore you with any kind of stats. You all work in the sector, you all have experienced it. I will hearken back to July 17th, during the height of the Peter Street evacuation in Toronto, which, as we know, continues. It just underscores the relevance of BChat. BChat was able to mobilize and to decant the African asylum seekers to the churches by setting up an emergency reception center. As you all know, this should have been the work of the government, but as you know, they did not. 2 further components that ignite me about BChat is the intergenerational leadership. Once an OG like me is gone, there will be younger people to take over. The other feature that ignites me is that it's replicable. It can be replicated provincially and federally. While this is not an idea at its embryonic stage, it's sort of an entity, it is about housing, and housing is health, it's education, it's employment, and it's well-being. Housing is equity, and BChat will endeavor that folks like our brothers and sisters that fled Uganda will have a safe harbor like Canada to come to where they can be safe. Are we going to the, are we almost? Okay. Oh my God. Okay, why don't I just go to the end? I didn't realize okay. Okay. The big takeaways are housing is health, it's education, it's employment, and it's well-being. It ultimately affects the type of society we create, one that is inclusive, one that provides the opportunity for all to thrive, irrespective of our race, our class, our gender, and who we love and live with. Oh my God.
We have gifts for you. There you go, Diane. Weren't they fantastic? Yes. See how much information you can pack into 3 minutes? Thank you all for that. That was great. That was a great way to start the morning. Please bear with me as I organize myself. And now, from my brother. Kimahli and I grin at each other. We are so blessed this morning to have joining us Kimahli Powell. Kimahli is a senior leader in the international non-governmental organization field with expertise in community building and strategic advocacy with a focus on international development, law on policy, HIV/AIDS, and internally displaced persons. Kimahli completed his undergraduate studies in political science at the University of Ottawa. He holds a Doctorate of Laws from the University of Victoria. Among his career highlights is supporting Dignitas International's innovative work in supporting community-based system health strengthening in Malawi, as well as helping launch the HIV Legal Network's constitutional challenge to Jamaica's anti-sodomy law while developing a monitoring and evaluation framework on legal advocacy. Since joining Rainbow Railroad, first as executive director and now as chief executive officer, Kimahli has led the organization through transformational growth, helping thousands of people in the process. Under his leadership, Rainbow Railroad expanded its international reach and completed successful crisis interventions in Chechnya, Egypt, Uganda, and more recently, Afghanistan and Ukraine. Kimahli and Rainbow Railroad have been recognized with several awards, including the International Lesbian and Gay Travel Association's Pathfinder Award, the Mark S. Bonham Center for Sexual Diversity Studies 2018 Award, and the 2018 Inspire Award for Community Organization of the Year. Please join me in welcoming Kimahli Powell, our keynote speaker for today.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Debbie, for that introduction. No, that says 3 minutes. That's not going to work. I'm sorry. I'm not known for my brevity. But I am going to try to do it in 44 minutes. I'm really pleased to be here. Before I start, I just want to say thank you, Elder, for your introductory remarks, as well, Alfred, as your interventions. You know, at Rainbow Railroad, we talk often and are still thinking about what it means to advocate and push for additional resettlement of persons on stolen land, and we continue to reflect on that, and so thank you for those remarks. Also, Diana, I was going to loop you in as youth, but also thank you, Tatiana and Stefan, for your interventions. When my nieces show me videos on TikTok, I think the world is doomed, but with your interventions, it makes me feel better about the future. And of course, Debbie, my sister friend, thank you for being a mentor and a leader to not just me, but all of us. Rainbow Railroad would not be here if it wasn't for you to pave the way, so thank you, Debbie. This is my second time at an OCASI conference, delivering a keynote, and quite a bit has changed for Rainbow Railroad in the space since then. Not just for our work, but the work in general. So I want to talk a little bit about where we've come since then and what it means to be at the intersection of LGBTQI, forced displacement, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex plus, or queer. I'm just going to use that term because LGBTQI plus doesn't roll off the tongue when giving a keynote, and talk about our work a little bit more broadly. First, just in case you don't know what Rainbow Railroad does, we are an organization based in Canada, the United States, whose main focus is to help LGBTQI plus people facing persecution find safety. Can you all see me here? I'm going to move away from the podium. So something happened recently, and my staff relentlessly tease me about this, but this is me and the Prime Minister. Despite the rumors since the separation, there's not a thing going on. I know when you see images like this, you're not really too sure. But these are scenes from a meeting that we had in June, not just the two of us, alongside my board chair, our founder, Michael Batista, and a number of colleagues in June of this year when Rainbow Railroad and the Government of Canada formed a partnership to refer LGBTQI plus refugees to Canada. It is the first of its kind agreement. Very few organizations have a partnership outside of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and it marks a turning point in a 7+ year quest of mine to allow us to refer individuals to Canada. Thank you. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got there in a second, but let me tell you why we had to do this. I think we're familiar with this number now, but this is the number of people that are displaced around the world, 108 million people. And before, the last OCASI conference I was at was before COVID. And it's just remarkable just how much that number has grown. Since the Syrian crisis, that number was just under 60 million people. After Venezuela rose past 60, by the peak of Afghanistan, we were talking 80 million people. And when we were talking about 80 million people, we thought that number was extraordinary, right? The number has since grown to 110. The peak highest number, where we talk about on record, was 80 million people at the Second World War. And I think I want to hold space at this moment to know if you have been engaged in the current conflict in the Middle East. I think we know no matter what your political views are, what we know for sure is that the number of people who are displaced are only going to increase. And I think the thing about just watching the current conflict and how we react to news in the media is that the number of displaced people also grew in the Turkey-Syrian earthquake that happened last year. That climate, geopolitical crises, the world is a scary place, and the number of people who are displaced is only going to grow. And we know that is affected in our work that we do every day. So we know this number. There's another number that I don't know if we know about that's at the intersection of work, is the number of countries that criminalize same-sex intimacy. Now, I think I did this exercise a couple years ago, so if you were here a few years ago, we're gonna test this out. And don't engage if you remember this little gimmick I'm about to do. If you are able-bodied and able to do so, please stand, because, wanna guess, yeah, come on, stand up. Okay, so this is a how many countries criminalize same-sex intimacy test. And if you know, so There's 195 UN member states, countries in the world. If you know how many countries criminalize same-sex intimacy, or you think you know, I'm going to give you a range of numbers, and if you think it's in that range, you can sit. Yeah? Yes? All right. So if you think between 0 and 10 countries criminalize same-sex intimacy, have a seat. Okay, if you think the number is between 10 and 20, have a seat. Okay, if you were here last time I did this, raise your hand. Okay. If the number is between 20 and 30, have a seat. Yeah, just sit. You're wrong, but sit. If it's between 30 and 40, have a seat. Don't look at your friends, just like be brave. Okay, if you're still standing, you should be concerned, right? If it's between 40 and 50, have a seat. Okay, if it's between 50 and 60, have a seat. If you think it's over 70, have a seat. That was a trick question. If you're still standing, you were correct. The number is 66. So 66 countries criminalize same-sex intimacy. 66, right? Including 14 that criminalize transgender identity and expression, and 12 that actually impose a death penalty on same-sex intimacy. So what does it mean to be at the intersection of LGBTQI+ forced displacement and criminalization, those two phenomena? That's the intersection of our work every day. If you're looking at this chart, you'll see that many of the countries are clustered in sub-Saharan Africa. And so the phenomenon that affects our work is that by traditional convention, in order to be a refugee, you need to flee one country and resettle or claim refugee status in another. But as I'm about to explain to you in a minute, if you are a Ugandan person facing displacement, I'm going to talk about the situation in Uganda momentarily. If you are facing persecution, you need to flee. People flee to neighboring Kenya that also criminalizes same-sex intimacy. And where many times people report UNHCR not allowing people to enter to gain refugee status determination. Or if you are not a cisgender man, the difficulty to be able to navigate through countries if your gender does not match your identification. These are just a host of the persecution and phases that our community faces trying to navigate the system. And so Rainbow Railroad exists primarily to allow individuals who are facing persecution, but also having difficulty navigating border systems to find safety. I want to go back to talk about 108 million people and talk about what our response is. Refugee admissions in 2022 were 114,000. Now, when we think about, and Canada is #1 on this list, and so we should take solace in that, but the fact that admissions are not matching the number of people displaced is something that we should be concerned about. In the United States, where we also work, the number was at an all-time low during the Trump administration at about 15,000. The Biden administration has tried to increase resettlement. It's tried to reach 125,000 for 2 years straight. It has not quite met that target. This is this year's admissions total. And so the point of this is world's on fire, people are displaced, and is government matching the need, right? And we know the result of this is that people are on the move. People are making huge attempts, many times dangerous, in order to find safety. And you all see that in your work every day. I want to say something bright, though, because we have made progress. There are 34 countries where same-sex marriage is legal. South Africa being the only country in the continent in 2006. And when India decriminalized same-sex intimacy in 2018, before then, 2/3 of the world's population were under countries that criminalize same-sex intimacy. So we've made progress. But I think as we currently, in this moment, should be concerned and feel a regression in policy around the world. As a result of that, Rainbow Railroad this year has fielded 12,000 12,000 requests for help. There's two ways people reach out to us. One, you can go on our website, rainbowrailroad.org, and there's a form in multiple languages. The other way that people reach out to us is countries around the world. We have partners on the ground who refer cases to us. And 12,000 is just the people who have the ability to find us online or through networks. I think we could understand that the number of people who are at risk far exceeds this number. So just a little bit about what we do. Our work kind of has 5 components. And VITAL was a catchy acronym. My colleagues, I can't take credit for it. But we verify cases around the world. So we had 12,000 requests. You can understand the enormous tax role it is to actually just determine who we help through that many requests. So we do a pretty extensive job at kind of doing vulnerability assessment and trying to figure out how we can help as many people as possible. Then we initiate case files with each individual. And the thing about Rainbow Railroad is that we actually engage in evacuations and emergency relocation. So we do the work at getting people from overseas to multiple countries around the world. We advocate. You know, we are a service provision organization. And so when we talk about advocacy, we don't want to be spending our time advocating. We want to spend our time doing the work. But we also realize that in a broken refugee system, we have to stand up and push for our population. And then, of course, we are an ongoing exercise. We want to center our work on the people that we help, and so we lean in often to try to learn from the individuals and use that to increase the work we do. So let's go back to me and the Prime Minister and our bromance. Before I do that, it's, our work, one of the things we learned during COVID is that we evacuate people, but evacuation doesn't happen in a vacuum. In order to do that, there's many forms of assistance that we use to keep people safe, that we used when every single border was closed. I'm really proud to oversee an organization that actually was able to expand our mission and grow during the pandemic, because we leaned into the fact that safety doesn't just require emergency evacuation. It means being able to provide direct cash assistance in country, work with partners on the ground, work with crisis response. I see you, Pauline, and our friends at the 519 that helped during the Chechen response, information services referrals, and complementary pathways. And this is the impact of our work. We've helped now over 5,000 people find different ways of safety and have moved, I think, 2,000 people through international borders. I want to talk about the top 10 countries where we've filed requests. You can see it on the chart here. Does a country stand out on this list? Shout out if there's a country that's weird on this list. Yeah. I want to talk about that because I think there's countries here that seem not surprising, given the work we do. But the United States has grown as a country of people requesting resettlement. And in this year, the top 3 countries of people requesting assistance are Afghanistan, Uganda, and the US. And I say that because as we're talking about LGBTQI+ rights and forced displacement, and we look at what's happening in the United States and what's happening in our country, that if you're not watching what's happened in Saskatchewan this past month, you should be aware that our rights are fragile and they can be rolled back at any time. But this is just a snapshot of the countries where we received assistance. So I said before that we don't generally see ourselves as an advocacy organization, but in the wake of all these crises and on our path to become a referring partner, we've realized that we've had to do a lot of work to convince our government, who frankly was not as convinced when we first started to advocate that LGBTQI+ people faced unique vulnerability that needed additional assistance, about what our work is and why this is a problem. And so we've had to engage in a lot of advocacy and research and making the case and spending a lot of time explaining why this community needs support. And ultimately, the key thing to take away, right, and that you all I know will understand, is that being a refugee is difficult. Being an asylum seeker is difficult. Facing war, conflict, displacement is difficult. One of the silver linings we see is that communities are able to flee together, right? We saw that in Syria, we see that in other crises. The main difference that I want you to take away is that being an LGBTQI plus person on the move, an asylum seeker, a refugee, is a very lonely and isolating experience. Usually you are fleeing from your families or community. The trauma that you face because of that displacement, alongside other forces of trauma, is what you are facing when you're on the move. And that's the essential argument that we had to continuously make over and over again. It's evidenced in a key document that we've created, and I invite you to whip out your phones if you want to get it. Every World Refugee Day, we release a report talking about the state of LGBTQI plus persecution that really puts in stark relief the situation our community faces. And so data is one of the key things that is not available in the spaces around LGBTQI plus forced displacement. And so again, we realize that we need to intervene and provide more information about what queer forced displacement looks like. And so this report is a snapshot of what forced displacement looked like for our community in 2022. 3, 2, 1, I'm moving on. No, I'm joking. If you want to scan it, go ahead. Okay, I'm on a clock. But we don't do this work in isolation. OCASI, if you did not know this, OCASI is a proud, I want to say proud, member of From Borders to Belonging. It's a coalition of organizations co-chaired by Rainbow Refugee, our sister organization in Vancouver, and a host of organizations, including our own 519 here in Toronto. What makes me proud is that we're not doing this work in isolation. There's a movement of organizations and collectives from coast to coast making this argument alongside Rainbow Railroad. And our quest to work with IRCC on this has spanned 3, 4, I'm on my 4th minister. 4th minister? Yeah. Here's us with Minister Hussein back in 2019 when the coalition successfully helped launch the Rainbow Refugee Assistance Partnership, which is transforming how communities across the country are receiving refugees. It is this coalition that got Gender X on local passports and is advocating together around this community. So our work is not in isolation. We are bolstered by groups across the country doing this work. The other touch point about our work is UNHCR. In 2021, UNHCR, another Kyoko time, really acknowledged after much advocacy that it needed to do more on LGBTQI plus forced displacement. If you are in the weeds of UN engagement, you know there's a Global Refugee Forum happening in December this year. If you know anything about the Global Compact of Refugees, the pledges that states made in order to commit to doing more on refugees did not adequately include provisions for LGBTQI plus persons. And so UNHCR recognized that, and we've been pushing to work with UNHCR at a global level to understand that this phenomenon, the work to actually engage and do more work on refugees has to include this community. And I want to give you a touch point on why this is important and the journey of Rainbow Railroad. So when we started, we recognized that our ability and our skill was able to help one person facing persecution relocate to another. That's how we started in our origins. And then we realized as states were targeting individuals, the situation in Chechnya was an example where hundreds of individuals were being tortured by the state, being forced to flee the Republic of Chechnya to neighboring Russia, where they were being hunted by their families. And we had to change how we worked to not just work with an individual, but what does it mean to actually have to do crisis intervention work when you're dealing with hundreds of people in one context? That is when we first advocated with a government and multiple governments to try to negotiate for relocation efforts. Afghanistan was another touch point. It was another touch point in what does it mean for our work to be at the intersection of geopolitical crises around the world. And I gotta tell you, we did not 2.5 years ago, August 2021, think that we would be engaged in work at this scale. However, if you remember what it was like way back in 2021, in the middle of COVID, to be witnessing this crisis emerge, and governments kind of stepping up or stating that they were, like Canada did, that they were willing to receive refugees and people from Afghanistan, including the LGBTQI+ community, which they named, all of a sudden, the floodgates opened. We received thousands of requests, not just from us, but I remember 2021 August really well because I don't know, I think we were in Delta then. You remember when we were naming COVID variants? I think it was the Delta phase, and I was just about to go on a plane for the first time. I was really nervous, everyone was weird. I know we're still traumatized by it all, but it wasn't that long ago. And I was going to France for 2 weeks. It was my first vacation for a while. I was like feeling maybe a little burnt out from COVID and increasing our capacity during COVID. And I landed getting ready to try to take some time off, and my flow blew up because the Taliban had taken control of the government. The government of Canada made an announcement of resettled persons, including LGBT+ persons, and I had like the World Bank reaching out to see what Rainbow Railroad was doing, and multinational fora. And so what did it mean for us to all of a sudden be thrust in this geopolitical situation, have governments saying that they were going to help resettle people, and us not knowing what our pathway was? That was the situation that we faced. And so we went to work. I went to Pakistan twice in the fall of 2021. We saw people on the move, and so we needed to document in real time the intersections of what it meant for the Taliban, not just to be persecuting women and girls, journalists, human rights defenders, but our community example. We worked quickly with Human Rights Watch and other partners to document those abuses. But then we had to hold the government of Canada to account, because we didn't have a way to refer cases. The government of Canada had on record say, we are going to resettle LGBT+ persons. And our question was, how? How, when we have these requests, work with us. We had already worked with the UK government, who actually, under Boris Johnson, actually was nimble and quick, and we resettled 100 persons in that government at that time. We had made arrangements with other governments, but we were asking Canada, what are you doing to help us relocate these people? And then we found ourselves having to, in the thick of creating safe houses, moving individuals, having to spend a lot of time and energy advocating. But we had to do it because people are at risk. And so that finally led to a meeting with then Minister Fraser. That was my third minister. In between was Minister Mendocino. If you're tracking the ministers. If you don't know, if you've seen Minister Fraser, he is very tall. Okay, he's like exceptionally tall. Like I'm like this on this photo, trying to match his height. But at least it engaged in a dialogue. And before then, we had, just a little weird nugget in Afghanistan, Canada and the United States had this interesting co-sharing arrangement where they allowed the US government to refer 5,000 people to Canada. It's on the public record. And because we were a US organization, we were able to negotiate with our US counterparts 200 people. But we had to explain, and including the individual in the photo with the minister. But we had to explain to the minister how weird it was that we had successfully negotiated with the US government to refer people to Canada. So if you're following that, we had negotiated, before we negotiated with Canada, we had negotiated with the US to bring people to Canada. And I think that was a turning point in a dialogue around like, we don't want to be doing this forever. We want to be able to do the work of resettling people. We have the skills, expertise, demonstrated knowledge, and people are at risk, and we don't have a lot of time, and the number's only gonna get worse. So let's work together. And that is ultimately what we did. And one of the things I wanna say is that this is a multi-partisan effort. So we had this moment in the fall of last year where we were able to make that case not just to the government in power, but there are 4 representatives of multiple parties in this photo who understood collectively that LGBT plus people who are forcibly displaced need solutions. And it is that which led to June, when we were able to successfully announce our partnership with the Government of Canada. And I mentioned that journey because that's the work that we do every day in order to advocate. I know you do it, advocating for housing, advocating for safe haven, advocating for food, shelter, and it's exhausting, right? We want to be able to do the work of service delivery for our constituents, and wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to spend as much time advocating for the people that we are trying to serve? But it also is the example of the power, because ultimately we do it because we're thinking about the people we serve. And that announcement and that successful intervention is going to be transformative. It's going to allow us to help people at risk. And let me tell you why it's important. So in May of 2023, Uganda passed what's called the Anti-Homosexuality Act. Raise your hand if you have heard about this. Okay. If you didn't, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it now. So Uganda already had criminalized same-sex intimacy. And this is when I have to remind people that those 66 countries that criminalize same-sex intimacy, those are colonial laws from the British Empire that were imposed on these countries. Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister, I don't know what, 5 Prime Ministers ago, there's a lot of turnover, she famously made an apology, apologizing to the Commonwealth about these laws and what it's meant to the community. So you always have to remember that when we talk about these laws. But Uganda already criminalized same-sex intimacy, and yet it wasn't enough. It was on this campaign, which is funded and continues to be funded by dangerous, just frankly, ultra-conservative groups, not just in the United States and Canada, who are adopting these laws around the world. If you've heard about anti-trans laws happening in the United States, it's the same thing. The same effort to regress laws and policies in the United States, the same effort that's trying to happen here in Canada is the same effort happening around the globe. So Uganda already criminalized same-sex intimacy and was on this campaign to further legislate against the community. And if you don't know, if you didn't have your hand up and don't think it's an issue that affects you, you're wrong. Actually, I was in Uganda myself in the wake of this law just last summer, talking to lawmakers who actually abstained from the bill. And they equate this rollback of anti-LGBTQI plus legislation as a touch point against democracy itself. And so if you're not watching the coalition around the rollback of these laws and what it means for our work in general, you're not paying close enough attention. And if you're in refugee serving space, I implore you to actually understand the details of what LGBTQI plus forced displacement means and empower yourself to be educated on this issue. So Uganda's new law further criminalized same-sex intimacy, including the death penalty. But I wanted to put the death penalty aside because when I was there on the ground, the thing that was most egregious and connected to our work was actually not the death penalty, but forced evictions. So under this law, landlords, under punishment, are forced to kick out of their home someone who's LGBTQI+. And so if you understand what that leads to forced displacement, if you've been to Uganda, Uganda, by the way, is a beautiful country. It's beautiful. It's also, if you didn't know this, fun fact, it's also the second youngest, it's a country with the second youngest population. I think, 80% of the population is between 25 and 39. And so that's hope in this ongoing fight to change hearts and minds. But in the meantime, there's this regressive rollback. And so if you're in Entebbe or Kampala, there's a lot of slums. And it's a close-knit communities. And if you're outed in one of them and forced to leave your home, you have to leave the area, right? And if you're doing that in the wake of this law, also feeling the pressure of punishment by death, you are on the move a lot. That is what LGBTQI plus forced displacement looks like in Uganda. And the challenge for a response is that systems, government systems, Canada's government systems, does not equate this as a humanitarian crisis. So Minister Srijan at the time, who was then, before the shuffle, the Minister of International Development Assistance said, we want to do more in Uganda. And we're like, okay, what does that look like? And when we probed into it, Global Affairs Canada was limited because Uganda is not facing war or conflict. Uganda is stable, generally, and yet it has this law. It has this law that is clearly displacing a segment of the community within the broader community. So there could be families and communities around this beautiful country of Uganda who's living a relatively stable life in the middle of huge mass displacement of one community. That is a touch point of our work. That's what led to 1,300 requests for assistance, 3 times what we received last year, and 80% of those requests out of 1,300 came since May of this year. That is what forced displacement looks like for a segment of a population amidst this global crisis. And when I say a global refugee crisis, to be clear, it's not a crisis of people, it's a crisis of government's failure to act, to match the need of the moment that we are in. And I want to say the reason, if you go back to the example that I gave around what movement looks like through international borders in sub-Saharan Africa, it's not just happening in Uganda. Ghana, which I tell you, 5 years ago, if you told me that Ghana would be introducing anti-LGBTQ legislation, I'd say, no way, right? But it's happening in Ghana, it's happening in neighboring Kenya, it's happening in Tanzania. And remember what I said before, right? The people who are legislating in Uganda and these countries are the same people trying to legislate in the United States, trying to legislate here in Canada. It's part of the same movement, and we should be deeply concerned. But the end result of this is people being displaced. So what does this partnership mean? Now that we are a partner of the Canadian government and we have the ability to refer government-assisted refugees, GARs, what does that mean for our work? It means that we will be able to refer a number of LGBTQI+ or queer folks to the government through a process, a pretty extensive process. I think one of the things that we're learning as an organization, and apologies, IRCC. Where's the IRCC folks in here? Hey, IRCC. When doing, so Rainbow, just a fun fact about Rainbow Railroad, when I started 7 years ago, it was just myself and a colleague working at the time, and we've grown considerably, and we've been able to do this work with 0 government funding. And that was a principle of our growth. So we are now, 7 years later, we operate in 2 countries off a $15 million operating budget, still with 1 government contract. And that 1 government grant of $250,000 has been a pain in the ass and introduced us. Can I swear? I'm sorry, Debbie. I'm sorry for swearing. We, as an organization that was nimble and has been able, and if you don't, I raise that story because the need is still great, but for a organization that is led by a marginalized group serving a marginalized group, serving a marginalized group, to be able to do this work without government support is a testament to the problem, but at least the willingness of communities to solve that problem, and gives us hope for the future. And now we have to work with IRCC, who we love. We love IRCC. And it means all of a sudden we have to adapt what we believe is good policy, queer-informed lens and policy, to a rubric, an intensive rubric to match the demands of the government. And actually, it's actually helpful stuff. You guys have given us some good stuff to work with, but it is a shift in our work. It's a shift in how we work around how we think about what it means to continue our work in multiple countries, but then actually have a partnership with the government. It means that we don't have to rely only on UNHCR. And I say that we're not in conflict with UNHCR. We actually believe we are in service to UNHCR, which I think was a multi-year effort. I think when I was younger, You know, I've dyed my grays, but when we were younger, I think it was an argument that I think we were not articulating the right way. That we're saying that because we are concerned about protecting a population that has faced discrimination in the system, that we are in conflict. But actually, we believe this partnership will actually strengthen our relationship with UNHCR, and we actually are having talks with UNHCR what it means to have a formal partnership as well. It means that we have to really further and continuously think about how we have vulnerable assessments. You know, going back to Afghanistan, it is, how do you do vulnerability assessment when 2,000 people are telling you the same story, right? That 2,000 people are at risk, facing persecution from the Taliban. And what do you do when you know that those 2,000 people are able to actually find some low data and like find the time to find out Rainbow on a website and fill out a form? What about the people who can't reach you, right? So vulnerability assessment through this partnership has to really be robust to really reach out to the people who are at risk. We're not doing this alone. We are locked up with a coalition, as I mentioned before, and we need to think through what it means for us to have this responsibility. If you know about complementary pathways, you might know in 2019 the government introduced a human rights defender stream, which really, I think, helped set the precedent for this program. And what we're learning from them is that just one group having the partnership is not the system. The system is, how do you have one partner that can then build referrals for a lot of partner. That's hard work. Partnerships are hard work, but that's what's part of this process. If we do not want to be gatekeepers of a deal with the Canadian government, that's not how community is led, that's not how we do the work. And we have to create a system by which we can take referrals from other people. Don't give me your referrals, don't give me your cards today. Okay, we will come up with a metric that's robust, that will allow folks to be able to identify people at risk. And people who arrive as GARs do receive benefits, which is an important part of the program. What this does not mean is that the right of asylum still has to be guaranteed under international law, and Rainbow Railroad will continue to fight for that. You know, just as an aside, I sit on the board of the Foundation for Black Communities, which I'm really proud of, and I'm really proud the foundation stepped up to provide support alongside the other communities mentioned to provide support to asylum seekers in the wake of this current housing crisis. And Peter and Richmond, and the Frank Victor encampment site is across the street from our office. And you know, one of the things I can tell you a personal story. You know, in our interventions, we've had many. I think the one I think about often is our intervention in Egypt. And just a slight warning, I'm going to get into a bit of a sensitivity here. In our intervention in Egypt, we were able to provide support to asylum seekers. I traveled the country, and you know, one of the individuals who relocated to Canada was Sarah Hagazi, who unfortunately claimed their life. And I think a lot about Sarah and the many Egyptians that we were able to bring, but didn't have the same benefits as the Chechens that we brought a couple years earlier. They were able to arrive as government-assisted refugees, but this group of refugees, we weren't able to do the same. We were able to just leverage mechanisms, and they were claiming asylum. And it was a difficult time for us because Rainbow Railroad focuses on overseas protection, and we rely on communities to provide support on the ground. And we realized that this community was not getting support of asylum seekers. And it's something that I think about to this day. Think about what we think about every day, but what it means to be doing the ongoing work of queer liberation and moving people in a housing system that's broken, in a gap in services that you all are fighting for in your communities. But that does not mean that we are saying the right of asylum is not guaranteed. We have to fight harder in the wake of a government program to ensure that people who claim asylum have that right to do so. And it's something that we think about every day. And I say that because we are actually interveners in with the with CCR and others around the Safe Third Country Agreement. We're proud interveners on that case. We didn't like the judgment or decision on that case. But we will continue to make sure that even though we are partners with the government, that all tools, right? There's a big movement on complementary pathways. It's a big, important movement. I see the time. But it's not the only way people get on the meter. We know this. We know that people are willing to ensure that all access to services in Canada. So next steps about this referral is we'll continue to implement a pathway and build the capacity to do referrals. We'll support our colleagues in the sector by opening up partner referrals, and we'll advocate for other organizations to also be able to do the same. And we do this work, going back to the beginning, because we know, you know, because you see it every day in your work, that people do this journey on their own. They do it on their own through dangerous means, sometimes irregular or illegal means, in isolation and escape from their families and communities. And I want you to hold on to that as you receive LGBT+ people in your communities. It is not enough to post a rainbow flag on your site and say that you are doing the work of queer liberation, right? In whatever city you are in the province, I implore you to learn more. I tell you, if you did not know about what's happening in Uganda, then you do not have enough information or knowledge to serve LGBTQI+ folks at risk. And so I want you to reflect on how can you do more. And I'm not saying that in isolation of any other group or ethnicity or gender. It's just that in order to do the work serving refugee population and immigrants, you need to be able to understand the complete intersections of the realities of people entering our doors. Canada is set to receive an unprecedented number of immigrants, and we should welcome that and be extremely proud of that. What are we doing to build the capacity in all of our sectors to receive those folks? Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Once again for Kimahli Powell. And Kimahli, thank you for that challenge. We are encouraging folks to take a look at our Positive Spaces training workshops online, but also a challenge for OCASI to ensure that our training content is up to date and is inclusive of these changes that are happening globally that are driving populations to places like Canada. So thank you once again. For our friends online, I'm sorry we're going to have to miss the Q&A section. We're trying to make time. And so I'm going to ask you, though, to stand up and take a good stretch as we ask our panel to join me on stage. Kimahli, thank you once again for educating us and for being dynamic. That's okay, and we won't tell anybody about that bromance you have going with the guy in Ottawa. Thank you so much. Are those evaluations, Adel? Okay. So take a stretch and then sit down as our panelists join us on stage. It is okay, folks, I'm not asking you to leave the room, although you can go to the bathroom and grab some tea if you need to. Let's just give people a minute. Colleagues online, we're just giving people a minute. I hope you're able to stretch as well. Grab some water. Have a refreshment break for 30 seconds. Okay. So, if you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. If you can hear my voice, clap 3 times. Thank you. That usually works, right? People usually go silent. I think I'm going to have to think of something else. Now you just clap and ignore me. You clap, you clap and you say, yeah, you hear Debbie? So, while our colleagues please take your seat, encourage our colleagues in the hallway to come back in. Colleagues in the middle of the room, as I get to know your name, I'm going to call you out on stage, right? Thank you. It is a great pleasure, and I'm looking to see if our panelist, Samia Hassan, is on the screen. There you are. It is a great pleasure to introduce our morning panel, Leading Change in Our Time. We are joined by our moderator, Aline Nizigama, Chief Executive Officer of YWCA Canada.
Hello. Yeah, this works. Hi.
And we're going to forgo with bios, but I'll leave it to Aline to introduce her panelists. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Debbie. And thank you, everyone, for being here, being at this conference. It's a tough act to follow, but we are building on what we heard starting this morning and what's going to be continuing to be part of the discussions throughout this conference. It's a huge honor for me to be moderating this panel. And I'm excited to be exploring really tough questions that build on what has been shared already on how we can lead change in our time. So again, my name is Aline Nizigama. As you heard, I'm brand new, 6 months into the job, Chief Executive Officer at YWCA Canada. I'm still in my honeymoon phase, and I intend to stay there if I can help it. And I'm so pleased to be joined here by my colleagues here in the room and also remotely on the screen. Here with me, I have Kerr, who is Executive Director or Lead at Writing Relations. And I'm going to be creating space for my panelists to introduce themselves, because there's no better way than speak from your own location to talk about your work when we talk about challenging topics. And I'm here as well with Lebin Gebra-Michael, Chief Executive Officer of Taibu Community Health Center. And on our screen, remotely, we have Samia Hassan, from Council of Agencies Serving South Asians. And I think it's Executive Director. And so, Kerr, you can start and talk a little bit about your work. And also, and I know we're talking about a very difficult topic, because when you're talking about leading change in our time, each one of those major 3 words that make up that sentence can be dissected on its own and can mean different things and can have different implications. And I would love for you, as you introduce yourselves, to also take a couple minutes to talk about what change means to you in a nutshell. And then we can start digging deeper into the questions. Kerr?
Okay. Hello. Okay. You can hear me. I am not the Executive Director of Writing Relations. I wish I was. Actually, no. Executive Director is a difficult position. I don't want to be number 1. Always number 2. The buck stops somewhere, not here. But I am representing Writing Relations here. And perhaps thematically lined with what we're talking about here. I was requested to do this because a huge thing within writing relations is center voices of the most marginalized people and let people speak for themselves. I only recently started admitting this, but I am a refugee. I became a refugee in the most interesting way possible, in that I come from a family that was middle income, perhaps upper middle income, and I came to Canada by myself because my family could afford a child living alone in the world. Our family relationship wasn't that great, but that's aside. So I was like, I want to go somewhere else because I hate you. And then I moved to Canada as a teenager. But during that time, the world got really chaotic. I ended up starting to transition here. And I guess I needed the distance from my family to be like, now I can think of things other than, arguing with my parents about things that people argue about at home. So anyway, I ended up transitioning. And during that time, we also found out I'm intersex. And politically, my body was just really difficult for the world to understand. And my own family was like, oh, we never liked you before, but we really don't like you now. So, I had to apply for asylum as a stateless teenager, and I did that by myself, and it's taken a lot of my adulthood. Let me tell you one thing. I'm on the other side. Actually, I was about to lie. I'm not telling you my age, but I got to an age this year, and I was like, oh my God, I've spent a lot of my time growing up just trying to prove to the world that I exist and I need to be here. And I only just recently got a proper ID. But anyway, yeah, so I'm representing writing relations, and they sent me here because they thought I was someone who would add some vital information to this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing very personal details about your life. And if you could say in a sentence what change means for you, because I can imagine it's a unique meaning.
I mean, echoing back to what I said in 3 million words, change is centering voices of the most marginalized people and allowing them to speak for themselves. And it was just like passing the mic.
Ah, powerful. We're going to get to unpack what that means further. But Libin, what about you?
So thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here to talk about a very difficult subject matter, but I think we can have a conversation. So my name is Liban Gabriel Mikhail. I represent an organization called Taibu Community Health Center. We are celebrating our 15th anniversary, not 45. We're still young, 30 years younger than OCASI, but 15 years celebration this year. And so within the context of change, Taibu as a community organization was established to actually do some work around change, influence change, take action around bringing change. The organization was established by our parent organization called the Black Health Alliance. That was founded by Dr. Christopher Morgan, who together with community members, health professionals and other grassroots community organizations wanted to change the disparities and inequities that exist around the health and social status outcome of Black population across the GTA. So Taibu started with the context of bringing about change. And change is important, change is indispensable. I think change is very, very crucial, particularly for Black, indigenous, racialized, marginalized population, because how the system has been set up from the very beginning was not meant for such communities and populations. So without change, I don't think we will be able to achieve our optimum health and well-being. So that is the context of how we're working around change. From an organizational perspective, we started as a young organization trying to change people's situation, whether it is, lifestyle behaviors or supporting black youth and black students who, excel in the education system or navigate systems in the education system, or supporting people around mental health. But over the years, we have realized that change, has to be more than working with people and doing programs and activities. And so we have begun shifting our thinking and to talk about and organize ourselves around systems change, because it's not actually us who need to change. It's more that the system has to change so that we can be well and healthy. And so this is a change within our organization that we have implemented to start thinking about the system is the one that needs to change. So that's where we are in our journey around change.
Okay, well, thank you, Liban. And Samia, after you, can you tell us a little bit about CASA and what change means for you in this context?
Yes, for sure. Thanks so much for having me and for allowing me to be there virtually. And I apologize, I was just under the weather, and for everyone's safety, I wanted to still be there and to be with you all and to provide some insight, but at the same time, keep everybody safe. So CASA is a social justice non-for-profit organization. We were started back in 1988. We have member organizations that we support. Currently, it's over 120 member organizations. A lot of them are grassroots organizations that are South Asian or serve South Asian communities. And our goal at the end of the day is to support those communities to participate, whether it's politically, economically, culturally, to the fabric of Canadian society. We do a lot of advocacy, and as Liban mentioned, our entire purpose is social and systemic change. So we don't create any frontline services, but our mandate is to do advocacy, to create opportunities of training, capacity building, tool development, policy change, transformational change. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means to us as CASA. And just as a side note, I know IRCC is in the room, and we're probably one of the very few agencies that is not funded by IRCC, but a lot of this work is really important. Despite us not doing frontline services, we do support our organizations that that provide those services, and to eliminate some of the systemic barriers that they face in providing services to the South Asian communities. So there's a lot of values that I've heard since the beginning of this conference. I've been here listening virtually, but some of the values that we follow and that can resonate with a lot of people in this room include obviously social justice, anti-oppression, anti-racism, anti-homophobia, being responsive to our communities, being collaborative, working in solidarity, and also accountability to our communities. And as an organization that's an umbrella organization, we also participate in a lot of advisory bodies and a lot of steering committees, including the Color of Poverty, Color of Change Steering Committee. We're also part of the Anti-Hate Community Leaders Group, which I'll talk about as well. We also participated prior to the pandemic in the Racialized Health Working Group, which Dr. Chris Morgan was part of from the Black Health Alliance. We're now part of the National Coalition Against Anti-Asian Racism. We're part of the Ontario Provincial Hate Crime Advisory. So a lot of different areas where we hope to provide some insight based on what our communities and our member organizations are facing. In terms of change and what change looks like to our organization and to our communities, I think it depends on which issue we're trying to tackle, because oftentimes change can seem so far off and so distant and so slow, and it requires so much patience, and you begin to learn the political nature of the work, and all of the politics involved, and all of the competing interests and the lobbying, and those that are loud and privileged, and those that are underprivileged, and what that means for all of us as we try to push for change. And sometimes, like, the idea of change, and I'm sure some of you will resonate with this as well, is like, it really makes you look into your soul and like think about why you're doing this and why am I here, and really test your commitment and passion for social justice. So it's all of that. And some of the work that that I think why we're here today, why I'm here today, is to talk about our anti-hate work that we've done since 2019. So as you may recall, back in 2019, there was the Christchurch massacre that happened in New Zealand. And post Christchurch, CASA was actually sought out by community members and community-based organizations to create a group of leaders and organizations that would come together and talk about how we can proactively ensure that these incidents don't happen in Canada again. And I say again because we have seen prior to 2019, there have been incidents of hate and hate crimes and hate speech happening here. So we put together this group, which is now a national group of over 40 organizations and individuals. And we work together to tackle online hate, whether it's on social media or on websites. We work with politicians, we work with legislation, we work with media, with the education sector, and we also work to create interfaith dialogue. And some of the things that we've done with this group is looking at how school boards, especially, so before I go to that, we had to kind of look at how do we focus our energy, because we all have limited energy, and we've heard about folks that have been burned out in this sector and trying to do this work. So we really had to see how we can focus our energy and invest our energy in areas where we can create political will for change. So we started to work with school boards, particularly on the issue of Islamophobia. And if you know, over the last couple of years, the Peel District School Board created an anti-Islamophobia strategy. The TDSB earlier this year has committed, which wasn't a very easy process, but they've committed to creating an anti-Islamophobia strategy for the school board. And now we're expanding our work to the Durham School Board and York Region School Board. So, and we find that change in terms of the legislative changes come the slowest, especially when it comes to anti-hate work. And we hear, and we've been hearing for the last 3 years, that there is an online hate legislation coming. We hear that there's a national anti-hate strategy coming. But it's just a process that requires for you to be patient and to push and to have that resistance that we've been talking about at this conference, to continue to push for change and hold our political leaders accountable.
Yeah. Thank you, Samia, for that comprehensive overview of your work. Thank you. And as I guess one thing that I omitted to also perhaps talk about was also my own location coming into this panel. And beyond my work as a leader in the YWCA movement, which in itself says a lot, and we'll get into that, is that I myself am also a refugee, like many people perhaps around the room. And that change has been a constant part of my life as well. And growing up in Burundi in East Africa and having to flee as a youth in the mid-1990s, and then living in a couple countries as a refugee, was self like that, exemplifying what needs to change in you so that you can adapt to different contexts and you can thrive, not just survive. And it's something that stayed with me and that I'm really hoping to bring into work that I do. And it was very important for me to be here to support OCASI in this conversation and to moderate this discussion. So Debbie, please signal if I know we slided a little bit on time, so just like raise your hand if we need to wrap up a little bit, and because no one of us here is looking at time. We're just gonna get into discussion. So we are acknowledging that there are extraordinary challenges that we're facing, and we are in the social service sector. We are addressing the most urgent needs, but really, and as has come up here, we are looking to really tackle bigger challenges, more systemic, complex, political questions. And that can be daunting. And in preparing for this panel, what was meaningful was for each panelist to just share one or two questions that was keeping us awake at night or that we were just thinking about, so that we can then bring this to this bigger group to sort of explore together. And so I'm going to go through some of those questions that we developed together and start to see what that looks like. And this is going to be an open conversation, so please feel free to jump in share from your perspective. This is a generative discussion, so it's also a respectful place, but that doesn't need to be repeated. And really, I'm encouraging you to continue to use your lived and professional experience to add to the exchange. And so one of the questions that came up was about how much is change realistic when community is ready to participate in change, but the ones that need to change, whether it's a structure or the system, is not ready or interested. And this was a question from you, Libin, so I guess you don't have an answer to that one. So I'm going to ask to everybody else, but maybe you have some insights as well. How would you tackle that when you're talking about change, but the people with the most power in the conversation are not ready yet?
That's a fun one.
Yeah.
And I literally, it's a thing I've thought about, not particularly in this sense, but in general, is that we have to always believe what we believe and stand on it. Now, when you look at the way systems are, we're always taught to compromise. The political system wants you to compromise. It's vote for the safe candidate, do the safe thing, because this is what folks are most likely to compromise on. I'm going a bit like Zoomer talk here, but I think it's okay to vote how you feel, no matter how, and I'll throw it out there, I'm super leftist, and a lot of times folks on my end of the spectrum think, let's move to this other side and meet them in the middle. And we compromise a lot, but what happens is we legitimize the other side, So stand on business, as the kids would say. And perhaps that means that the battle will be lost, but it's only through falling that you can rise. And we can only rebuild after it breaks. Sounds so bad when you say it. But if you watched the Hunger Games or you read the books, the Capitol had to fall for them to rebuild. And I'm not saying storm the Capitol, please don't. But go by conscience and vote how you believe, truly.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, Samia, any addition to that?
So I feel like in any area where we recognize change is needed, initially, I can't think of any structure or system which is ready to make the change. I feel like it's always going to be that they're not ready because they're so complacent to the way that things have been running for many, many years. So I think any change maker, to be a change maker, you recognize that there is going to be barriers and roadblocks ahead of you that you need to break down. And so I think preparing yourself and those around you and allies and helping them understand that it's not going to be easy to convince people. So once you kind of have that preparation and that realistic mindset in mind, then I think it becomes something that you understand and that you take into consideration when you're planning your strategy. And I spoke about briefly the TDSB example, and I'm not sure if there's anybody here from the TDSB, but they were not ready for that motion to be passed, and there's a lot of politics behind it which people don't know. And it was us actually bringing community voices to the TDSB meetings, students, teachers, parents, educators, and saying to them that this is what we're facing in this school system, and we don't feel safe. And we need a strategy now. And so we kept pushing and pushing when basically the people that were not ready for change ended up changing their mind. So I think that is the process that we have experienced. I'm not sure about the experiences of others, but in my experience, the structures and systems are initially never ready for change. You have to push them.
Thank you. I don't know if any of this is enlightening for you, Libin, when you asked that question, but perhaps you can also share where that came from as a question.
Yes, and thank you. And in the spirit of disclosure, I'm also a refugee from East Africa.
Brother,
a refugee
and a Francophone one too.
And an immigrant. So I just wanted to also identify myself as well. I think this is the question that is always in front of me when we're trying to address certain issues, whether it's in the school system, it's with youth, it's with chronic conditions, it's with mental health, seniors, all kind of aspects of work that we have to do. I think many of the people who are here today participating in the conference is always about change. It's about how can we bring change. And a few things come to mind. I know change is going to be hard, but I think, in a position that, I find myself, and as Samia was saying, it's very tiring. We all know that it is tiring, but it is the hope that change is possible that always takes us to the next step and say, okay, we need to continue to do this work. And a few things come to mind, and some of the learnings that we had also in recent times. The first thing is about the coalition of people who are passionate about change or are, dedicated to change, coming together to create that movement, right? So OCASI is a kind of a movement that we have, for example, when it is around change and refugees and immigrant situations. So that kind of a coalition is going to be very important. Not one single leader, not one single organization is going to bring about change, particularly the change that we're looking for, because they've been existing for generations, they're very deep-seated, they're systemic and institutional. So I think a coalition of people coming together, agencies coming together, is one that will drive and sustain change. I think Sami also mentioned earlier on that a strategy is very important. We need to know where we're going, how we're going, so that everybody is moving into one direction, and I think that's going to be very important. Obviously, there is this discussion around resilience, and it has become a word that we are being very careful to use within our communities, because one, people are assuming or are just, saying that, Black racialized immigrants, refugees are resilient, so they can continue with this issue, let them continue. So I think we have to be mindful, but I think that resilience or perseverance is going to be very important for us to carry forward as a movement and as a coalition. And the learnings that we had, and change so far, as at least in my experience in doing social work and mental health work, has always been reactionary from the system's perspective. Something negative happens, something bad happens, and then there's an attention to the situation, and then some things happen that looks like change, but they don't sustain themselves. And we've seen it with youth violence, we've seen it with, even the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter movement has opened opportunities for change, but it has been reactionary, and we know now it's dying down. People are not talking about it anymore. The attention, the resourcing, the finances have dried down. So it has been always reactionary, and I think the work that we need to do has to make it proactive and leading those changes. I think that's where we can then see some changes, movement, advancement towards change.
Yeah, thank you. And there's something that you said there that resonated with me where you're talking about institutions that have been there for a long time and how difficult it is for them to change. And that's something that's pertinent for me at the head of an organization that's been there for 150 years, for better or worse. And and that is when I think about in our time wording in the title of this session, is that what that means for us right now is that we are starting to look and reckoning with the impact of organizations, and that includes our own social service organizations, in looking how we change and evolve with the times, recognizing the harms that we may have participated in the past and that we may continue to harbor, and just really having that reflective look. So one example of how that change is occurring at YWCA Canada is, and I think across the sector in feminist organizations, is recognizing that like feminism has to be inclusive of all genders, and we have to fight for people who are still oppressed on the basis of gender, so we have to be trans inclusive, and that's a conversation. And that's a conversation that we are having across the country, and that is not easy, but and it's also looking at other aspects of what this country has gone through historically as it relates to different communities, like Indigenous communities and Black communities and racialized communities of all backgrounds. So it's something that I'm looking forward to be part of, but it is also quite challenging to acknowledge that. But I'm glad that we are creating space for those needed discussions. The next question that I'd like to bring, which kind of ties into what we've been talking about, is just to take us deeper into the complexity, is, and I'm going to come back to your question, Samia, but I'm going to go to one from you, Kara. How do we as individuals and organizations actively challenge a colonial, capitalist system that has been also based on white supremacy? And how do we do that in our nonprofit structures or resist complacency and complicity? I don't know if anyone has an answer, but we can try to dig deeper in that. I'll start with you, Samia. How are you doing it at CASA?
So I think one of the things that I find very challenging about working in the not-for-profit sector, I used to be a bureaucrat. I used to work for the City of Toronto. But working in the not-for-profit sector, I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that we actually walk the walk, and we don't just talk about external changes, but in our organization, whether it's our policies, whether it's the way that we treat our staff, whether it's the way that we structure the organization, how we deal with situations between staff. I think it needs that those values need to be followed within the organization first. And what I've seen is in a lot of organizations that claim to do social justice work, that internally their staff are not happy with the way things are done, right? Or even when their external perspective or the way that they portray their organizations externally is that, you know, they're supporting all of these causes, but internally, like, their own staff are struggling. So I think how I would answer that question, and I would encourage the panelists, if they have alternative ways of answering it, I would encourage you to do that. But for me, I think it's very important as a place of start and solid foundation that the organization that you're working in, the board of directors, the executive director, the staff, all of them need to be able to follow non-colonial ways of creating organizational structures so that we're not perpetuating that within our organizations. And we see that also with, again, I know IRCC is in the room, the way that funders deal with our organization is a very colonial, capitalist system, and we are constantly pushing back and constantly resisting. So that is itself like a very tiring process, because on one side, you're doing a lot of this work and you're external facing and trying to resist change and trying to resist complacency, but at the same time, like internally there's a lot going on that you need to fix within your organization. So I think that's one point which we miss when we talk about colonial structures.
Thank you. Libin, any?
Yeah, thank you, Samia. That was very good, especially how funding has been established, for a generation, and how we have to navigate that system as nonprofit organizations. I think one of the things that communities have done over the last 3-4 years is we've given terminologies to the mainstream space and leaders in those spaces, words like equity, diversity, and inclusion that is being used, very widely nowadays. I think, following the painful murder of George Floyd, every organization that I know has created an equity, diversity, and inclusion portfolio. But really, what does that mean, and what does, so I think, like breaking down those terminologies and really putting a plan to it is going to be very important. Because now the system is talking the same language, it feels that change has happened. And you may want to speak to a few people who are in the EDI portfolio, and they will tell you how change has happened or not. It's been challenging. So, so we have to deconstruct those terminologies and make sure that it is being applied. I think that's one thing, right? I don't like the word, personally, the word inclusion, because I ask, who's including who, and which space is somebody being included and invited? Are we just opening doors and windows and say, come in, without changing the color of the room and how power dynamics work? So we do this kind of work with organizations in our training for boards and leadership teams. So I think that's very important. And we also use a pathway, we call it the 4 A's. So it's acknowledgement, that racism exists. You'll be surprised at how many of us Canadians think that it doesn't exist in Canada, or at least we're much better than the US. These are myths that are part of us. So I think we need to really pay attention to where we are and how we understand that and acknowledge and see how it is manifested in our environment, in our organization. How is racism being manifested, and how do we see it or not see it? I think that's part of it, personal reflection, organizational reflections. And then we have the second A, which is accountability. Once we know that something is not right, then I think we should make ourselves accountable to changing what is not working. And then the other 2 A's, we call them advocacy and ally relationship. In the interim, I think as an organization or leaders in mainstream organization, we have a duty to advocate on behalf of racialized, marginalized voices, which means that we have to speak on their behalf. But our ultimate goal would be to create a space for their voices to be represented by themselves in the spirit of nothing about us without us.
And absolutely. Thank you. And in your respective experiences, how has what is the role of storytelling in like bringing forward that change that we need to see, that transformation that we need to see, and how do we leverage personal stories to have bigger impact? And this is a question from you, Samia. Thank you for asking it. How has that worked in your experience, Kurt?
I think being able to humanize people through personal stories is really significant and a huge tenet. And one of the pillars of writing relations is popular theater. And through that, you get people to find commonalities and common ground and how they attach to that. And everyone is both a teacher and a learner in these systems, and it creates a symbiotic relationship that builds community and strengthens the work overall.
Yeah, that's true. Samia, did this something that you've seen in your work and that you've used? And I think you've alluded to that. And perhaps you can share an example of how that has worked well.
For sure. So I think as an organization whose main focus is on advocacy, we're constantly trying to figure out how do we engage the communities that we're advocating for in our advocacy, because we always try to center the voices of the communities in the advocacy work. And over the last couple of years, we've noticed that the way that people consume information is very different, especially post pandemic, if I can call it that. I know there's still waves of COVID happening, so I don't know where we are in this phase. But this attention span of people, the way that they consume information, the way they digest information, the way that they claim ownership of information with social media and everything that's happening in the world is so different now. And so we actively try to do research and analyze how people in our communities are engaging with information, and then also the stakeholders that we're trying to impact with our advocacy. How are they consuming information? And coming, like I said, from a background of being a bureaucrat and looking at internally how stories are seen and how they impact policy changes, they have a huge impact. So I know sometimes we prefer solid, hardcore data over stories and lived experiences, but I can tell you from firsthand experience, they have more, the same, if not more, impact on policymakers and decision makers. And the way that you tell those stories and the way that you curate those stories and the tools that you can use to leverage those stories are very different now than what they were 10 years ago. So some of the things that we're doing at CASA is looking at how we can use technology, audio-visual equipment, to tell the stories of our community. So some of the things that we've started doing is a lot of animation of real life stories of our community members in our advocacy campaigns, and really, infographics, gifs and memes and those kind of things. We've noted, especially with, and I wouldn't even say the younger generation, I would say for a lot of people now that have access to technology, it has a different kind of impact than a PDF. Like right now, when we do a lot of our research, we often, yes, we create a PDF, but then it just sits on somebody's shelf or it just sits on our website, and nobody's reading a 40-page document anymore unless they're really interested in that. So how do we then borrow pieces of that research, borrow pieces of those stories, and make it impactful? And so what we've seen is creating, using technology to create videos, creating graphics, creating things that we can put on social media has been very impactful for the work that we've done. And just one example, actually recently, we created an app in our anti-hate work. We created an app for children and youth that are facing online hate. It's called the Eradicate Hate 2.0. And we've, again, used all of the types of information and the way that methods of consuming information for young people in that app. And we actually find it now, with everything that's happening in the Middle East, it's become very relevant, and children and youth are actually downloading the app to see how they can manage the online hate that they're receiving, or the images that are coming out of Israel and Palestine. How do they then support their own well-being and mental health through an app? So I think we have to kind of think forward in terms of how do we utilize technology, how do we utilize stories to be able to make that impactful change.
And I think that's one of the key solutions, actually, when we're talking about change. And this is also tied to one of the questions that you asked to Libin around our experience and learnings from the pandemic, as you mentioned, Samia, and how that was helpful to visualize the, how change was possible in the future. And that whole experience completely transformed how we relate to each other, sometimes changing our personalities and how we socialize. And how do we capitalize on what we learned from the pandemic to continue to drive bold change and ask for more in our advocacy? So that's really great. And I think we're going to wrap up. Just one last question, perhaps, to end on a positive, hopeful note. Is a question that came from me, is how do you maintain engagement at all levels when people are tired and exhausted and they've been through many change processes, and you just like to